For most gardeners, growing tomatoes is almost the only crop they even care about in the summertime, and you're gonna have a lot more success with your tomatoes with the right trellis. Kevin Espiritu here from Epic Gardening, where it's my goal to help you grow a greener thumb. We have a lot of tomatoes here, guys. We have I think I have 30 different varieties. I'm gonna be planting about 14 of them today, and in doing so, we'll be showing you 3 different trellises that you can use in order from lowest cost and cheapest, easiest to do, to something maybe a little bit more fancy with some extra strategies that'll come up in future videos. And at the very end of the video, I haven't forgot about you balcony or apartment gardeners. We'll also show you a trellis that you can use in a smaller space. So, you know what to do. Cultivate that like button, and your botanical blessing will be a blight-free season of tomatoes. That's a big blessing. And let's get into the video. So here's the example bed we're going to be working from. I've got 3 trellises in ground, like I told you. You could also do these in raised beds, so it works perfectly fine. This is around 22 feet long, so we're gonna do 7 foot here, 7 foot here, and 7 foot here. Starting with this corner over here, we're gonna go with one of the simplest trellises you can do, the Florida weave. So the Florida weave, we have the easiest trellis and the cheapest trellis, quite frankly, that you're ever going to need. So all you need is what's called a T-post. You can pick it up from your local big box store. I have a 7-foot one. You'll probably have a little better luck if you get an even taller one, maybe an 8-foot one, because the more you can drive this into the ground, the better. So how this works on the Florida weave style is you're just putting vertical supports up, and then you're weaving twine to hold the plants up in the sky. So I've got a 7-foot section cut out here. I'm gonna put one in over here. When you hammer it in, you wanna angle it away from your trellis, because eventually it's going to pull it over this way. So give yourself a little breathing room by angling it like this. So we'll go here. We're gonna put one right about here. This will be our ending point for this trellis. And then I'm gonna put one right in the middle, because the more plants you have in the middle, the more you're gonna need more extra support, because basically there's a lot of weight on these tomatoes, especially if you're growing these big indeterminates. So I'm gonna also bisect this and put one right here in the middle. Now you'll notice on these T-posts, you have a flat side and you have a ridged side. I like to have the ridge side on the exterior side of the trellis, so you can hook in with the twine really easily. You have a nice little notch to hang on. So what we're gonna do now is just pump it in about a foot or so we have some space on both sides of this bed. We're planting on the back side of this bed here, and then just let's get it in the ground. So it really is that simple with a Florida weave, and honestly this middle stake here might even be overkill. You want one every 6 feet or so. I just wanted to bisect and make sure we had enough support for the 4 tomatoes we're putting in. We're putting in one every 18 inches or so, which is about as tight as you really want to go with these. You could go tighter, but your pruning is just going to get really insane. So let's put 4 tomatoes in the ground, and I'll demonstrate roughly how the weave will go. Even though these are young tomatoes, you'll just have to imagine that they're big and bushy and see how that would work. So in go our tomatoes. I've got 4 varieties here. I'll talk about them as I put them in. The thing to remember with the Florida weave is you're sort of constricting them just with twine, and so you do want to put in tomatoes that are roughly the same height. Otherwise you have a really hard time. You have to wait for the shortest one to get to the height that you can twine them all up. So we've selected 4 here that are roughly the same size. Maybe one will outgrow another, who knows. But as far as spacing goes, we're gonna go with that 18-inch spacing between tomatoes, but we're gonna offset it in 6 inches each on each side, which allows for a perfectly spaced 4 tomatoes. So I'm coming in, got my little handy ruler here. We've gone in by 6 right here, right underneath the trellis. And planting tomatoes, that's almost a topic for another video, but just rough notes on it. You can plant tomatoes deeper than you would plant the average annual vegetable, because they have the ability to form roots throughout the entirety of the main stem, and even on these offshoot stems you can root what are called the tomato suckers. I have a full video on tomato pruning if you want to check that out, but here we go. I've got my Espoma tomato tone, which is the go-to in this case. They are the sponsors of the video. Sprinkle it in, nothing too fancy. A lot of people will say do fancy stuff when you're planting in your tomatoes. I don't know, for me, I don't do too many fancy things, and the tomatoes turn out just fine. So take that with a grain of salt, but that's just been my experience. So we're gonna dig it out somewhat deep here. Get our tomato in. We could go even deeper than that, but I don't wanna mess with this natural soil too much. So let's just get another little handle out, and in we go. These roots don't even need to be teased out that much, so we're fine. In goes our tomato, and on to the next. So I have it tied off here, and you can see why these teeth become really useful, because this is pretty much set at this height, which is exactly where I want it. So what I'm gonna do is come around the back side of the first one. So I'm on the back here, and then I'm gonna weave over the front side of the second one, and then I'm gonna come around this middle post. We'll lock it at the same height 3 times. So I kind of have to come up. When you're on the lower levels of the Florida weave, you kind of have to come up and do this, but it's no big deal. So we'll come over, make sure we're at the same height we are. We'll wrap it 3 times. 1, 2, and 3. And then we would continue on down the line here, because of course there's 2 more tomatoes over here, but I just want to show you what you would do. So what you would do now is you would come back, lock it in on this side, so the opposite side, come over, lock it in on this side. See how it sandwiches the stem perfectly in between? And then you'd tie it off over here. So I'm gonna continue the row and you'll see what it looks like. So that's the Florida weave. It's pretty simple. Of course, as this grows up, you'll need to do more sections, probably every 6 to 12 inches or so, depending on how tight you want to get with it. But that's it. Now let's move over to the conduit. Our next trellis setup is basically just what I'll call a conduit trellis. It's actually a kit from Gardner Supply Company, but the only thing in the kit is just the conduit connectors. You use standard electrical conduit just like this, again, right at the big box store, quite inexpensive. The other thing I'm gonna add though, is when you're putting conduit on the ground, you probably wanna slot it over rebar for a little bit of extra support. And so all I'm doing here is we're just gonna hammer in the rebar layer first, and I'm gonna bring this back just slightly, just because we want that conduit to sit on something. Our rebar's in. I didn't get too fancy with it. I just hammered it maybe 40% of the way down or so. So the 8-foot poles, and you can really make this to whatever you want, because like I said, the kit is just connectors, so you can cut the conduit to whatever you want. We'll just slide these on, and we're gonna build it out from here. Okay, it's actually easier to install this on the ground first. So this pole right here is one of the vertical uprights, the 8 feet uprights. This is a 7-foot piece of conduit to go with our 777 trellis design with these 3 different trellises. These are the pieces, kind of interesting. It's like a conduit clamp. So they come on each side here. There's a little sort of puzzle piece array that fits in just like that, boom, and there you go. So let's go ahead and install this. So kind of interesting, you gotta kind of slot it in like a puzzle piece, just like that. And then we'll put that around, we'll hold it in place. I'm gonna match it up to the edge here. And we'll thread our bolt through. And it's really interesting, this nut is like a reverse nut, so it doesn't screw on this way, it screws on that way, which was news to me, but hey, it works. So on we go. All right, let's put this on top. Okay, on our conduit, because it's so tall, there's a lot of different methods you could use here, but I'm just gonna use the exact same poly twine. I'm gonna tie a knot on the top, drop it down, and use these tomato clips, which you'll see in a second. But first, I gotta tie these knots.
So up top here, we do want a knot that will stand the test of time. So I'll show you a really simple one called the constrictor knot. So you go over your main conduit, very simple. Then you wrap around, come over again, but make a crossover. So it should look like an X on the top. Then you take the tail end and go on top of that main line. You can see how my hand is doing it there. And then take that and lift up that X that you made and just slide it straight through the top. So it sort of constricts upon itself, hence the name. So you can pull that down really, really hard, and all it does is tighten it up even more.
So now I'm right above my tomato with my line, but what I'm gonna do is cut it longer, and just to be extra safe, we'll cut it longer just like this, and I'm gonna tie around this little irrigation stake. We'll just do a standard double overhand knot here, come in, tie it up, and we're gonna stake it into the ground for just extra safety, extra support. So in we go, right next to our tomato. Nice and tight line here. We wanna get close to that tomato because we're gonna be clipping. Okay, now here's the real magic. This is what we're using. It's a tomato clip. A lot of people misuse the tomato clip. The magic of the tomato clip is that this little section right here clamps down on the string. And so what you want it to do, let's bring it over into the front here, is you want to come through and you clamp down on the string, put it right in there, clamp it down, So now that's not moving anywhere. See, it's not even closed and I can't really move it. And then you'll slot it in your tomato and you'll clamp around the side, and now it's adhered perfectly right there. So as this grows up, I'll grab another one. Let's imagine there's some growth up here. I'll come in, clamp my tomato around the clip, clamped like that, and you can see it just stays hovering in the air right there. Absolutely perfect. Let's do the rest of these. So there's our conduit system. It's very, very simple. You've got that constrictor knot up top. You don't have to do that. It's just the one that I personally seem to prefer. And then I got some stakes going down into the ground, really nice and tight, tomato clips coming up, and I can just clip this as I go, making sure that I prune off any suckers. Do have a full video on that if you want to see how to prune your tomatoes properly, especially these big indeterminate ones. But let's move on to the last one, the lower and lean. So here we have our lower and lean, one of the coolest ones in my opinion. And you're gonna need a couple extra components for this. You're gonna need something called a tama hook, clever little name for this little squiggly piece of metal here, and you'll see why in a second. And then you're gonna need something to hang the tama hook on. I had some leftover sort of plasticized metal wire here, so I just created these little loops, and we'll slide it through the conduit, which is really nice why this design is this way, is you can just slide things on and off easily. So I'll need 4 of them. I have one down there. I put 3 right here. Let's slide this back. So I'll toss those down the line. So now what you need to do is you need to hook your tama hook just like this. So this is hanging in midair, but we also need something for the tomato to climb up. So this is sort of a modified conduit style where what you'll do, let me wrap it up really quickly. So you want to tie it off in this little crutch right here. Nothing fancy here, double overhand knot is completely fine. So now I'll take it off this for a second here. I'm just gonna wind it. So I'm gonna go from here to here. On these little inlets to, we'll do like maybe 15 or 23. Okay, now how does this work? Let's hang it back up. Now what happens when we have the tomato grow up? What do? It gets to about here or so, what do? All you do is you bring it down like this, you just let more out. And then what happens is the tomato will drop and you can keep on clipping it up. So all we need to do now is cut it off and tie it to the bottom. Same idea here, nothing too fancy. We're just going to stake it down and tie it up. So there's the lower and lean system. Of course, it gets a lot more exciting once the tomatoes grow up and you can lower and lean the tomato, but more coming up on that in a future video. Container gardeners, I did not forget about you. We do have a trellising option here for a grow bag, even in ground. This is just a basic tomato cage, but it's a cylinder instead of that conical cage. Honestly, I don't know how those things are so popular. They're quite flimsy. The mistake a lot of gardeners will make is they'll try to grow an indeterminate tomato, a huge one, in a tiny little cage. You can see this one is quite large. Hopefully we'll have this Socolati's tomato going all the way up it pretty soon. You get a lot more durability and stability with a cylindrical cage, but there are a couple other options I'll show to you. So here's that same cage just in the ground, same idea. And all you're gonna wanna do is keep that tomato nice and pruned. Remember, refer to my pruning video, all the way up this cage and you're in a good spot. This is nice and sturdy. This one over here, I know it probably caught your eye. This one's called a Vertex tomato cage from Gardener's Supply Company. I've got a bean in it right now. It's kind of winding its way up. Just a different design, very lightweight, very, very tall, really easy to manage, a little bit on the pricier side, but a lot of different areas to clip in any of your little tomato stems so you have a nice support. So whatever tomato trellising system you use, the principles are the same. You just want to keep those tomatoes up off the ground, give them access to sun, and you can do it in a variety of different budgets, from basically a $15 or $20 Florida weave to a sort of pricey, fancy conduit system to this lower and lean that offers a lot of versatility. And of course, if you're a container gardener, you can just grow in a cage and you'll be completely fine. So I hope this gave you a really good primer on tomato trellising. Leave any comments down in the comments, and until next time, good luck in the garden and keep on growing.